Certainly, Iranian militias that are in Iraq, now that the fight against Daesh and ISIS is coming to a close, those militias need to go home.
Tillerson was talking about Hashd al Shaabi, also known as the Popular Mobilization Units. They're a coalition of predominantly Shia militias that have been pivotal in the fight against Daesh. They were the tip of the Iraqi spear that smashed its way through the terror group's defenses in Mosul, Fallujah, and across Iraq. The Popular Mobilization Units were formed in 2014. That's after the shocking spread of Daesh across Syria and Iraq. This resulted in a religious decree by Iraq's top Shia cleric, Ayatollah Ali Sistani, who called for resistance against the terror group. In response, Shia volunteers organized themselves into militias and launched the defense of Baghdad, which seemed ready to fall in 2015. Since then, a coordinated counteroffensive with Iraq's army has seen Daesh largely defeated in Iraq. That's why leaders in Baghdad insist the coalition of militias is vital to security.
حشد الشعبي فهي جماعة مسلحة ضمن الدستور وتلتزم بالقانون العراقي، وهناك أصبح تطور وانضباط عالي من هؤلاء الجماعات.
But rights groups such as Amnesty International say the Shia-dominated militias routinely target Sunni civilians in reprisal attacks. The US also insists they serve as proxies of Iran and destabilize the region. But Iraq's government appears too dependent on them to try and rein them in. The Popular Mobilization Units were at the forefront of the latest offensive against the Kurds in northern Iraq. The units and the Iraqi army launched a joint offensive in response to a recent referendum on Kurdish independence. That resulted in the recapture of the city of Kirkuk.
They attacked us with laser-guided weapons, so it went through the armor of the car and it injured me, the driver, and the gunman. They really have good gunmen. They're all Iranians. They're professionals at destroying their target. They can destroy any target.
It's that sort of military professionalism that's made Baghdad's leadership reluctant to disband the militias. But it's also causing unease in America and across the Middle East. They say the continued presence of such militias could trigger another sectarian backlash between Shia and Sunni Muslims, just as the fight against Daesh appears to be winding down. Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, joining me from Abu Dhabi is Ali Khaderi. He's a former special assistant to U.S. ambassadors in Iraq and is now CEO of consulting firm Dragoman Ventures. And in Washington, Luke Coffey. He's a director at the Douglas and Sarah Allison Center for Foreign Policy, as well as a former special advisor to the UK Ministry of Defense. And from Tehran is Professor Mohammed Marandi from Tehran University. Gentlemen, thank you very much to you all for joining us. I hope you can help me better understand this situation. Mohammed Marandi, let's begin with you. Tehran provides support, financial support, weapon support, training support to Hashd al Shaabi. So who does the Hashd al Shaabi report to, Tehran or Baghdad?
The Hashd al Shaabi obviously reports to the Iraqi government. The Iraqi prime minister has expressed his satisfaction with their work. The only reason why the Hashd al Shaabi was created in the first place was because ISIS had entered Iraq. Thanks to the support that countries like Saudi Arabia and other US allies gave to them, they grew, and when they pushed through Mosul and they were moving towards Baghdad, the Iranians were asked by the Iraqis to help defend the country. So the Iranians became involved. They helped create the Hashd al Shaabi, but it is an Iraqi force. And just as the fact, it's a fact that the Iranians helped the Iraqis defend their country, when later on the ISIS, Daesh, moved towards Erbil, because early on the ISIS had nothing to do with Erbil, and there seemed to be some sort of secret agreement between Barzani and ISIS. But when they did finally attack Erbil, it was the Iranians who went in to help Mr. Barzani and save city from falling into ISIS hands. So it is a part of the Iraqi government, and the Iranian support is within the framework of Iraqi law.
Okay, Ali Khaderi, is Hashd al Shaabi under the total control of Baghdad?
To be frank, it never ceases to amaze me, the Iranian skill for disinformation. It's unbelievable. The reality is that the core elements of what is now known as the Hashd al Shaabi were created in Tehran by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps shortly after the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Exhibit A of this is the creation of the Supreme Council for the Islamic Revolution in Iraq, an Iraqi political party led by the Al-Hakim family, and its militant branch was the Badr Corps, which was officially part of the IRGC, which fought alongside Iran against Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War, what the Iranian people called Janga Tahmili, the imposed war. The Badr Corps now holds the Iraqi Ministry of Interior, and one of the top commanders of the Hashd al Shaabi, Hadi al-Amari. More recently, also in the 1980s, was the creation of Katab Hezbollah, led by Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, who is a top lieutenant to Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Quds Force. Mr. Muhandis blew up the American embassy in Beirut, and he also blew up the American embassy in Kuwait and plotted to kill the emir. He is sentenced to death in Kuwaiti courts. During the 1990s, Katab Hezbollah and Hezbollah also plotted to blow up the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia in 1996. And more recently, after the American invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, the IRGC militias have killed and maimed thousands of American and coalition and Iraqi troops, both in Afghanistan and Iraq. The gentleman from Tehran is correct that after 2014, Ayatollah Sistani issued a fatwa and called for the popular mobilization of Iraqi militias to defend Baghdad against ISIS, and I applaud the Ayatollah for this. However, Iran has exploited the creation of these militias and co-opted them to report directly to Tehran under the guise that they are part of the Iraqi government.
So I still don't have an answer. Mohammed Morandi, I know that you want to jump in, but I have to get Luke Coffey in. Luke, help me understand. Is Iran playing a constructive role in Iraq?
Of course not. Yeah, they're playing a destabilizing role, not only in Iraq, but across the region. Iraq is probably where it's most accentuated what Iran is doing. Yes, they have huge control over certain ministries, mainly the Ministry of Interior, certain militia groups in Iraq. Whether or not the chain of command goes direct to Tehran is a different matter, but without a doubt, Tehran has influence with these militias directly. So, yes, they are playing a destabilizing force. They're not playing a constructive role. And the sooner that Iran stops meddling in a sovereign Iraq, the better for the region.
Mohammed Morandi, I'm going to get you in just a second, but let me follow up with Luke, following up with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's comments. When you look at these comments, these soldiers, yes, they are Shia, but they're also Iraqi. When you look at these comments that these forces need to go home, where do they go? Where is home?
That's absolutely right. Frankly speaking, it was a very sloppy choice of words that Secretary Tillerson used. And even if he was specifically talking about any Iranian agents that are in Iraq, which there are some, it's still something he probably shouldn't have said because the U.S. isn't going to do anything meaningful about it. It's a bit like President Obama when he said all the Russians need to leave Ukraine, and then he didn't do anything about it. So it probably would have been best if Secretary Tillerson chose his words more wisely and probably not commit the U.S. to doing something that it's never going to do in reality.
Mohammed Morandi, sloppy, perhaps irresponsible. How do you categorize the U.S. Secretary of State's comments?
Well, I think it's simply the anger that's coming from Washington because Iran has helped Iraq to regain its sovereignty. The United States wanted to weaken Syria, and it's wanted to a weak Iraq. And the Hashd al Shaabi, which is not just Shia. I've been to Mosul, and I've been in territories held by Sunni Hashd al Shaabi, and their relationship with their Shia counterparts were excellent. And I also passed through areas that were controlled by Christian Hashd al Shaabi, and I heard that not far off were the Turkmen and the Yazidi Hashd al Shaabi, and they were all working in close coordination. With regards to the accusations about the bombings in Saudi Arabia, these are all bizarre, and the Americans will use, if one day they'll accuse the Iraqis, and one day it's Hezbollah, one day it's Al-Qaeda. I don't think the Americans will decide on what narrative to use tomorrow. But what is important is that the destabilizing force in this region is really the United States. The United States helped create Al-Qaeda and the Taliban through its interference in Afghanistan and Pakistan in the 1980s with Saudi Arabia. The Wahhabi extremism was created as a result of U.S. policy. And the U.S. alliance with Saudi Arabia has continued to help spread that extremism. The destruction of Yemen was carried out, and it's being carried out with the help of the United States, Canada, and England, and France, and their weapons. While on the other hand, the United States, we know through the WikiLeaks documents that have been leaked, that Hillary Clinton knew that in 2014 Saudi Arabia was supporting ISIS. We know through the Defense Intelligence Agency document of 2012 that the United States knew that from early on in Syria, the extremists had the upper hand. They were the dominant force. And as the head of that organization at that time, General Flynn later admitted in an interview on Al Jazeera, the United States took a willful decision to help its allies support the extremists. So who was behind ISIS?
Professor Morandi, I'm sorry,
and then
I have to interject
there's
here.
one more thing. The leaked audio tape where Secretary Kerry told so-called Syrian opposition figures that the United States allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus in order to put pressure on the government, which coincides with Obama's interview with Friedman, where he said the United States allowed ISIS to advance on Baghdad to put pressure on the prime minister there. So the role that the United States has played in Libya and Iraq and Syria and Yemen and Afghanistan has been nothing but devastation, and the United States is not in a position to complain about instability.
Well, we're going to give that position to Luke Coffey now. Did your government create the Taliban? Did your government create Daesh?
These are ridiculous accusations. The speaker before me is taking a very black and white view of the situation, and we all know that the Middle East and the region is a place of many shades of gray. And I will tell you this: I agree that the U.S. hasn't always pursued policies that have brought stability to the Middle East. I will admit this. But I guarantee the gentleman from Tehran, he will not admit this even about his own government. He won't even acknowledge that Iran is a destabilizing force at times, that it tries to export its radical Islamist revolution. I survived 2 chemical attacks that were carried out by Saddam Hussein with your government's help. I survived 2 chemical attacks. So I don't think there's anything that you could say to me that will convince me that the United States has done anything. I will admit that the actions taken by the U.S. government at times have not helped with stability in the region. But he's in denial. He will not admit this about Iran. And look at the Gulf in Bahrain. Look at the occupied islands of the United Arab Emirates. Look at what's happening in Yemen. Look at Syria propping up Assad. Iran is exporting its revolution, and it's bringing instability across the region.
Right. Gentlemen, I love this debate. Luke and Mohammed, I love this debate, but I have to get in Ali here. How important is Hashd al Shaabi for Iraq, for the Iraqi army?
Well, the problem, frankly, I think it does a disservice to focus only on the Hashd al Shaabi. The reality is, as I pointed out earlier, intentionally, since the 1979 Khomeini's Islamic Revolution and the creation of the IRGC and the creation of a variety of IRGC proxies in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, Hezbollah being the most prominent example, the Iranian regime has openly, as part of its constitution, sought the export of the Khomeini's Islamic Revolution to the rest of the Muslim world. It is part of their constitution. As part of that campaign, they have sought to subvert and weaken Iran's Arab neighbors from within. So rather than, frankly, foolishly doing what the United States and the coalition has done across the Middle East, openly, overtly invading, what the Iranians do as patient carpet weavers is that they don't go blazing, guns blazing through the front door. They go in through the window or the back door, and they co-opt these countries from within. So the exhibit A of this is what happened in Lebanon with the Iranian support of two proxies, Hezbollah and Amal, and then getting them to fight each other, and support of the Lebanese civil war. And I have to note, the Iranians support not only Shia radicals, but they also support Christian groups, they support Sunni groups, and Lebanon is the perfect example of how Iran seeks to control the region by weakening the Arabs and getting them to fight each other. Exhibit B is, of course, what happened in Iraq. Again, Iran supports a variety of Kurdish parties, Christian parties, Sunnis, and most prominently the Shia. And they have the Shia fight each other. And of course, Exhibit C is Syria, with the Iranian regime's support of the Assad regime and his use of chemical weapons and the Holocaust that they have waged, ethnically cleansing Syria of its Sunni Arab population to cement the Iranian land bridge from the Mediterranean to the Chinese border.
All right, this is a much deeper issue. Ali Qadiri from Abu Dhabi, Luke Coffey from Washington, D.C., and Professor Mohammad Marandi joining us from Tehran. Thank you very much for this heated debate. I appreciate it.